The crisp scent of new leather and polished mahogany hung in the air of the Gulfstream G700. A bubble of manufactured tranquility, cruising at 40,000 feet. In seat 1A, a woman with skin the color of rich coffee gazed out at the endless blue, her thoughts as vast as the sky. But this tranquility was about to be shattered. The click of hard-soled shoes on the cabin floor announced the arrival of the captain, a man whose polished uniform couldn't hide the storm of prejudice in his eyes. He stopped before her, his shadow falling over her, and with a voice laced with unearned authority, he uttered the words that would ignite a firestorm and send his own life into a tailspin, ma'am. I need you to move to the back. The journey began not with a bang, but with the quiet, near imperceptible hum of Rolls-Royce engines. For Serafina Vance, this sound was a lullaby, the mechanical heartbeat of the empire she had built from nothing but a blueprint and an unshakable belief in herself. Today she was just another passenger, a name on a manifest for Vance Aviation's exclusive charter flight, VA-77, from Teterboro to Van Nuys. She had intentionally booked the flight under a slightly altered, unassuming name, Sarah Vance, a simple test of the system she had so meticulously designed. She believed in walking the ground her employees walked, in seeing the world through the eyes of her customers. It was the only way to ensure the gold standard she demanded was not just a veneer, but woven into the very fabric of her company. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant charcoal grey cashmere pantsuit. Her only jewellery, a pair of understated diamond studs, and a vintage watch with a well-worn leather strap. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, low ponytail, revealing a face with high cheekbones and intelligent, observant eyes that missed nothing. There was no flashy logo, no ostentatious display of wealth. To a casual observer, she was a well-dressed professional, perhaps a lawyer or a successful consultant. No one would guess she was the sole owner of the multi-billion-dollar Vance Aviation, the largest and most exclusive private jet fleet on the planet. The cabin of the Gulfstream G700 was her design philosophy made manifest. Cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood accents, and brushed platinum fixtures created an atmosphere of serene luxury. There were only 8 seats in this particular configuration, ensuring maximum space and privacy. Serafina occupied 1A, the seat directly behind the cockpit, with the most legroom and a commanding view of the cabin. She had a leather-bound journal open on the pull-out table, its pages filled with neat, precise script detailing observations on everything from the check-in process to the thread count of the napkins. The boarding process was almost complete. A portly man in an expensive but ill-fitting suit. Harrington huffed as he settled into seat 2B across the aisle. He immediately began a loud, self-important phone call boasting about a recent merger. Serafina made a small note in her journal: review policy on in-cabin phone etiquette during boarding. Disruptive to the premium experience. The flight attendants, 2 women, named Karen and Chloe, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. Karen, the senior attendant, had a smile that was bright but didn't quite reach her eyes. She catered to Mr. Harrington with a fawning deference, laughing a little too loudly at his weak jokes. Chloe, much younger, and with a genuine warmth in her expression, offered Serafina a pre-departure glass of champagne, with a quiet, respectful grace that Serafina appreciated. She noted Chloe's name with a small star beside it. It was then that Captain Marcus Thorne emerged from the cockpit. He was a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor, radiating an aura of self-importance that seemed to suck the oxygen from the cabin. He had the chiseled jaw and silver-streaked hair of a man who might have been handsome if not for the permanent sneer etched onto his lips. He was a veteran pilot, technically skilled, but his personnel file, which Serafina had reviewed months ago during a routine audit, was flagged with several minor complaints about his abrasive attitude towards junior staff and a certain dismissiveness towards female colleagues. He had been kept on due to his seniority and impeccable flight record, a mistake she was beginning to think. Thorne did not make eye contact with Serafina. His gaze swept past her landing on Mr. Harrington. A look of recognition and camaraderie passed between them. "George, good to see you on board." Thorne boomed his voice, unnecessarily loud in the confined space. "Marcus, didn't know you were flying this leg." "Good. I like having a pro at the stick," Harrington replied, puffing out his chest. Thorne's eyes then flickered back to Serafina. He took in her simple attire, her dark skin, and the open journal. He saw not a customer to be respected, but an obstacle, an anomaly in his rarefied world of corporate titans and old money. An almost imperceptible frown tightened his features. He leaned in and exchanged a few whispered words with Karen, the senior flight attendant. Karen glanced at Serafina, her professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of apprehension, before she nodded curtly at her captain. Serafina felt the shift in the atmosphere. It was a familiar chill, a subtle poison she had encountered many times on her ascent to the top. It was the quiet assumption that she didn't belong, that her presence in a place of power or luxury must be a mistake. She closed her journal, her fingers resting on the smooth leather cover. The quiet hum of the engines seemed to grow louder, a prelude to a storm she hadn't anticipated, but was more than prepared to weather. She watched as Captain Thorne straightened his tie, his posture rigid with a sense of purpose she found deeply unsettling. He was about to make a decision, and she knew with a certainty that settled like ice in her veins that it would be the wrong one. Captain Thorne approached Seat 1A with a slow, deliberate stride, a walk designed to project authority. He bypassed Serafina entirely, addressing a spot on the bulkhead just above her head. "Ma'am," he began, his tone a cloying mix of forced politeness and undisguised condescension. "We have a bit of a seating situation. We'd like to accommodate Mr. Harrington here in this seat." Serafina slowly lifted her gaze from her journal to meet his. Her expression remained neutral, a placid lake under which powerful currents moved. "I'm sorry, Captain. Is there a problem with my seat?" Thorne was clearly unaccustomed to being questioned. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "There's no problem with the seat. It's just that Mr. Harrington is one of our most frequent flyers, a member of our Diamond Elite program, and he prefers Seat 1A. It's a small courtesy the airline likes to extend." He gestured vaguely towards the rear of the cabin. "We have a perfectly comfortable seat for you, in row 4. Karen will help you with your things." He said "you," as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. He wasn't asking. He was informing her of a decision already made. Mr. Harrington watched the exchange with a smug smirk, leaning back in his seat as if enjoying a bit of theatre. The junior flight attendant, Chloe, who was collecting glasses nearby, froze her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the captain's rigid back to Serafina's calm face, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Serafina did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply held the captain's gaze. "Captain," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "I booked this specific seat in advance. I am also a paying customer. I see no reason why I should be moved." The challenge, polite as it was, ignited Thorne's temper. His professionalism was a thin veneer, and it was cracking. "Ma'am, let's not make this difficult," he said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a more menacing edge. "I am the captain of this aircraft. My instructions are not suggestions. For the comfort and convenience of our valued clients, I need you to move. Now." He used the term valued clients in the plural, but his eyes were fixed on Harrington, making it clear who he considered worthy of the title. The implication hung thick and poisonous in the air. She was not one of them. And who determines which client is more valued than another? "Captain Thorne, Serafina," asked her voice, still infuriatingly calm. She had deliberately used his name, a subtle reminder that she knew who he was. The use of his name seemed to rattle him for a moment, before he doubled down on his arrogance. "I do," he snapped. "On this aircraft, my word is final. Now, are you going to move, or am I going to have you escorted off my plane for non-compliance?" The threat was abud. The doors were sealed, and they were preparing for pushback. But it was a naked display of power, a man using his uniform to bully a passenger he had already judged and dismissed. Karen, the senior attendant, hurried over her face a mask of false concern. "Ma'am, please let's not cause a scene. It's a lovely seat in the back, right by the window." Chloe, standing frozen by the galley, felt a surge of shame. This was wrong. Every piece of her training screamed that this was a violation of company policy and basic human decency. A passenger's seat was their seat, unless there was a safety or security issue. This was nothing more than a power trip fueled by prejudice. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the captain's furious glare pinned her in place. He was known for his vindictive nature. A negative report from him could end her fledgling career. Serafina looked from Thorne's hostile face to Karen's placating one. She saw the smug satisfaction on Harrington's face and the terrified conflict in Chloe's eyes. She had seen this entire tableau play out in different boardrooms at different deal tables her entire life. It was a test of will, and it was one she had never failed. She placed her open journal face down on the table beside her, a gesture of finality. She folded her hands in her lap. "Let me be perfectly clear, Captain," she said, her voice now edged with steel. "I will not be moving from this seat. Furthermore, your attempt to remove a passenger from their assigned seat for the sole purpose of placating another is a serious breach of Vance Aviation Protocol. Your threat to have me removed from the flight is an even greater one." Thorne's face purpled with rage. "That's it. I'm having you removed. Unruly passenger." He reached for the intercom button to call the ground crew. "You have made a very big mistake." "No, Captain," Serafina said, her voice cutting through his anger like a diamond blade. "You have." As Captain Thorne's finger hovered over the intercom button, a symbol of his authority, Serafina Vance spoke again. The words were not loud, not shouted, but they landed in the pressurized silence of the cabin with the force of a physical blow. "Captain, I suggest you take your hand off that button." There was something in her tone, a shift from patient refusal to absolute ice-cold command, that made him pause. The other passengers who had been trying to ignore the confrontation were now watching openly, their curiosity piqued. "You're in no position to make suggestions." Thorne snarled, though a sliver of uncertainty had crept into his eyes. "You're about to be charged with interfering with a flight crew." Serafina slowly leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. Interference is when a passenger disrupts the safe operation of an aircraft. What you are doing, Captain, is abusing your authority and discriminating against a passenger. These are two things that I, as the owner of this airline, take very, very seriously." The silence that followed was profound. It was a vacuum sucking all the air and arrogance out of the cabin. Mr. Harrington's smug grin evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. Karen, the flight attendant, took an involuntary step back, her face draining of all color. Chloe's heart felt like it had stopped beating entirely. Captain Thorne blinked. He stared at Serafina, his mind struggling to process her words. He saw her simple suit, her quiet demeanor, her dark skin. The image did not compute with the statement. It was impossible. A joke. A bluff. The owner, he scoffed, a desperate, brittle laugh escaping his lips. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of fantasy you're living in, but this is Vance Aviation. It's owned by—" He stopped. He actually didn't know the owner's first name. The enigmatic founder, S. Vance, was notoriously private, a name on paper, a legend in the industry, but never seen. Everyone assumed S stood for Stephen or Samuel. "My name," she said, enunciating each syllable with lethal precision, "is Serafina Vance. The S on every single registration document, the name on the tail of this multi-million-dollar aircraft you are currently in command of, stands for Serafina. And you, Captain, are in breach of contract. More than that, you have become a liability to my company and a disgrace to the uniform you are wearing." She reached into her purse and retrieved a slim, elegant wallet. She didn't flash it around. She simply opened it and placed a business card on the table. It was heavy, obsidian black cardstock. Engraved in simple platinum letters were the words, "Serafina Vance, founder and CEO, Vance Aviation." Thorne stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. His mind raced, connecting impossible dots. The quiet confidence, the refusal to be intimidated, the unnerving calm. It was the calm of someone who held all the cards, who owned the entire deck. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, greyish pallor. The sweat that beaded on his forehead was suddenly cold. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor of the aircraft had just dropped away from beneath him. He looked at the woman in seat 1A, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the power that had been there all along. A power he had been too blinded by his own prejudice to recognize. The pantsuit was not just simple. It was bespoke, tailored with a precision that cost more than his monthly salary. The watch was not just old. It was a Patek Philippe, a quiet statement of immense wealth. The diamond studs were not just jewelry. They were flawless D-color stones. He had mistaken quiet elegance for insignificance. I don't—" he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. His entire world had been upended in the space of 30 seconds. Mr. Harrington across the aisle looked as though he might be sick. He had been smirking, enjoying the show, siding with the man in uniform against the woman who didn't belong. Now he realized he had been cheering for the man who was actively insulting the sole owner of the airline. He sank lower in his seat, trying to make himself invisible. Serafina retrieved her card and placed it back in her wallet with a soft final click. She then picked up the in-flight satellite phone from its cradle next to her seat. "Your word is final on this aircraft," you said, she asked, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Let's put that to the test." She dialed a number from memory. "This flight is not going anywhere." The call connected with a crisp, clear tone, bypassing any switchboard. Serafina's voice was low and measured a stark contrast to the panicked chaos she had just unleashed in the cabin. "Robert, it's Serafina. I'm on board Victor Alpha 77. We have a situation. I need you to ground the aircraft. Immediately." There was a pause. The entire cabin was so quiet that the faint, tinny voice of the man on the other end was just barely audible. It was Robert Maxwell, her chief operating officer, and the man she trusted implicitly to run the logistical side of her empire. Grounded Serafina. "What's wrong? Is there a mechanical issue?" "A security threat." Robert's voice was sharp with concern. "The issue is with the command staff," Robert Serafina replied, her eyes never leaving Captain Thorne's horrified face. "The pilot in command, a Captain Marcus Thorne, has attempted to remove me from my assigned seat based on what I can only describe as blatant discrimination. He then threatened to have me forcibly deplaned for non-compliance. He is at this moment unfit for command." The implications of her words slammed into Thorne like a physical force. Unfit for command. That phrase spoken by the owner of the airline to the COO was a death sentence for his career. His pilot's license, his pension, his decades of work, all of it was vaporizing before his eyes. Miss Vance? It was a misunderstanding. He pleaded, his voice cracking. The authoritative captain was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating man. Serafina held up a single finger, silencing him without a glance. She continued her call. "Robert, I want you to personally meet the aircraft at the FBO. Have terminal security stand by, but discreetly. I will handle the deplaning. I also want you to pull the complete personnel files for Captain Thorne and the senior flight attendant Karen Miller, and get me the corporate profile for a passenger named George Harrington. Yes, he's involved. I'll debrief you in the lounge. That's all." She disconnected the call and placed the satellite phone back in its cradle. The click echoed like a gavel. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with dread. Karen, the senior attendant, stood frozen near the galley, her face a mask of waxy horror. She had sided with Thorne, whispering her encouragement, ready to help him move the problematic passenger. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Mr. Harrington was trying to melt into the upholstery of his seat. He fumbled with his phone, his fat fingers struggling to type a message. Perhaps a desperate plea to a lawyer or a PR specialist. He had been a bully by proxy, and now the person he had helped bully held the fate of his corporate travel account, and perhaps more in her hands. Only Chloe seemed to move. Hesitantly, she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she offered Serafina a bottle of water. "Miss Vance, can I get you anything?" she whispered, her voice full of awe and terror. Serafina looked at the young woman and offered her the first genuine, warm smile she had shown all day. "Thank you, Chloe. A glass of water would be lovely." The act of kindness was a stark contrast to the icy judgment she had dispensed moments before. It was a clear signal integrity would be rewarded just as surely as incompetence and bigotry would be punished. An announcement came over the intercom, but it wasn't from Captain Thorne. It was the co-pilot, his voice tight with confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Jennings. It appears, we've received an instruction from the tower. We are returning to the gate. We'll provide more information as it becomes available. Please remain seated." Thorne stumbled back into the cockpit without another word, his face ashen. The gentle lurch of the plane as it stopped its taxi and began the slow, humiliating turn back towards the terminal was the final confirmation. His authority had been stripped away. He was no longer the captain of the aircraft. He was merely a passenger being delivered to his execution. Serafina took a slow sip of her water. She opened her journal to a fresh page. At the top she wrote the date, the flight number, and the names Captain Marcus Thorne, Karen Miller, George Harrington, and below them, with another small star, Chloe Jenkins. She was no longer just observing. She was adjudicating. The flight back to the gate was the longest 10 minutes of Marcus Thorne's life. The silence was his judge, and the quiet, steady scratching of Seraphina Vance's pen was the sound of his future being rewritten. The Vance Aviation private terminal at Teterboro was a masterpiece of understated corporate power. It was less an airport and more a luxury hotel lobby with plush armchairs, original modern art on the walls, and a silent, efficient staff that moved with ghost-like discretion. As the passengers of VA-77 were ushered into this space, the tension from the plane followed them. Mr. Harrington was sweating profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Karen Miller, the flight attendant, looked physically ill, her skin pale and clammy. Captain Thorne had been met at the cockpit door by airport security and the head of Vance Aviation's flight operations. He wasn't handcuffed, but the stern-faced men who flanked him made it clear he was not free to go. He was escorted directly to the executive conference room, a glass-walled chamber known to employees as the Cube. Seraphina had deplaned last met on the tarmac by Robert Maxwell. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with a calm demeanor that belied a mind as sharp as a scalpel. He had been with Seraphina from the beginning, the one person who knew every rivet and every balance sheet in her empire. "The lounge is ready, Seraphina," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I've reviewed the preliminary files. Thorne has a history of minor HR complaints, arrogance, dismissiveness, nothing that crossed the line into actionable discrimination until today. Harrington's company spends about $3 million a year with us, or they did," and the flight attendants she asked walking beside him. "Karen Miller is a senior crew member, 15 years with the company. Chloe Jenkins is 6 months out of training. Not a single mark on her record." Seraphina nodded. "Bring them all to the lounge, Harrington and Miller first. Then I want to speak with Ms. Jenkins alone." The executive lounge was a large, quiet room with a commanding view of the airfield. Seraphina took a seat in a large leather chair at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. Robert stood discreetly behind her. First Harrington was shown in. The bravado he'd shown on the plane was gone, replaced by a desperate, fawning obsequiousness. "Ms. Vance, a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea. Marcus Captain Thorne. He's an old acquaintance, and he completely misread the situation. I am so sorry for any offense. My company, we value our relationship with Vance Aviation immensely." Seraphina let him talk her face, an unreadable mask. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer a single word of encouragement. She just let his panicked excuses hang in the air until he finally sputtered into an awkward silence. "Mr. Harrington," she said at last, her voice soft but firm, "you did not misunderstand anything. You witnessed a man in a position of authority attempt to bully a passenger. You saw him use his power to discriminate, and you did nothing. In fact, you smirked. You enjoyed it. You were complicit because you believed it benefited you. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, and by extension, the character of your company." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Robert will be in touch with your CEO tomorrow to inform him that Vance Aviation is terminating your corporate account, effective immediately. We will, of course, refund the unused portion of your contract. We don't do business with people who condone bigotry. You may leave." Harrington's face turned a mottled shade of red and white. The loss of the account was a huge blow, but the public humiliation would be worse. He opened his mouth to protest, but one look at the finality in Serafina's eyes made him shut it again. He turned and walked out of the room, a man visibly diminished. Next came Karen Miller. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Vance, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I was intimidated. Captain Thorne, he can be very difficult. I was scared for my job. You are a senior flight attendant, Ms. Miller." "Serafina," said her voice devoid of sympathy. "You have a duty of care to all passengers. You also have a duty to uphold the values of this company. You failed on both counts. You were not a passive observer. You were an active participant. You approached me and urged me to not cause a scene. You sided with the aggressor against the victim. Your fear for your job does not excuse your failure of character. Your employment with Vance Aviation is terminated effective immediately." Karen let out a choked "ooh" and was quietly escorted out by a human resources manager who had been waiting outside. Finally, Chloe Jenkins was shown in. The young woman was terrified, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She stood before the long table, looking small and fragile. Serafina's expression softened. "Chloe, please sit down." Chloe perched nervously on the edge of a chair. "I have one question for you, Chloe," Serafina said gently. "Tell me in your own words exactly what you saw and what you thought." Taking a deep breath, Chloe recounted the events. She didn't editorialize or offer excuses. She simply stated the facts: the captain's immediate and dismissive attitude, his unreasonable demand, his escalating anger, and his threats. Then she looked Serafina in the eye. "I thought it was wrong, Miss Vance," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It was against everything we were taught. We are supposed to ensure every passenger feels respected and safe. Captain Thorne made you feel the opposite. I was afraid to speak up. He's a captain. I'm new, and I'm sorry I didn't. I failed." Serafina listened intently, then nodded slowly. "You did not fail, Chloe. You were put in an impossible situation by a superior who abused his power. You were afraid, and that is understandable. But what you did right was recognize the injustice. Your conscience is clear. That is a quality I value far more than misplaced obedience." The final judgment was reserved for Captain Marcus Thorne. He was brought into the lounge not as a respected pilot, but as a disgraced employee. The two security guards stood by the door. Robert Maxwell now sat beside Serafina, a tablet in his hand displaying Thorne's entire professional history. Thorne attempted one last desperate gambit, a blend of apology and blame-shifting. "Ms. Vance, I offer my most profound apologies. My conduct was inexcusable. I was under a lot of stress, personal matters, and I allowed my frustration to get the better of me. I misjudged the situation entirely. It was a lapse in judgment, a terrible one. But in a 25-year career, I hope you can see it as an anomaly." Serafina stared at him, her expression cold. "A lapse in judgment. Captain, is that what you call it? When you look at a black woman in a premium seat and your first instinct is that she doesn't belong there. When you decide without cause that a white man's preference outweighs her right to the seat she paid for. That is not a lapse. That is a reflection of your character. It is a deep-seated bias that has no place on the flight deck of any of my aircraft." She gestured to Robert's tablet. "And this was not an anomaly. Robert has found a pattern. 3 separate complaints from female co-pilots about your condescending tone. 2 from junior flight attendants regarding verbal intimidation. You've been flying under the radar, Captain, using your seniority as a shield. Today your shield is gone." Thorne paled, realizing how thoroughly his life was being dissected. "Your employment with Vance Aviation is terminated," Serafina stated, her voice leaving no room for appeal. "We will be contesting your unemployment claim on the grounds of gross misconduct. Furthermore, we will be submitting a full report of this incident, including your abuse of command authority and discriminatory actions to the Federal Aviation Administration. While they may not revoke your license, I assure you that a formal inquiry of this nature on your record will make it exceedingly difficult for you to ever captain a commercial or private aircraft again. You publicly threatened a passenger and attempted to have her removed without cause. You deemed yourself unfit for command, and I agree." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You have disgraced the uniform, you have endangered the reputation of my company, and you have demonstrated a profound lack of integrity. We are done here." Thorne stared at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and pure hatred. The life he had so carefully constructed, the superiority he felt was his birthright, had been dismantled in less than an hour. He was escorted out of the room, a captain with no ship, a pilot with no wings. The consequences cascaded outwards from that room. The story, despite Serafina's desire for discretion, was leaked. An anonymous passenger on the flight sold the details to a popular aviation blog. Within days, the headline was everywhere. "Vance Aviation CEO fires biased pilot mid-flight." The story went viral. George Harrington's company faced a public relations nightmare with clients and shareholders questioning the judgment of its leadership. He was quietly moved to a non-client-facing role, his career effectively stalled. Karen Miller found herself unemployable in the exclusive world of private aviation, where reputation was everything. But the most significant changes happened within Vance Aviation. Serafina didn't just punish the guilty. She used the incident as a catalyst for fundamental change. She called an all-hands meeting for every pilot, flight attendant, and ground crew member in the company. Standing before them, she was not just an owner. She was a leader. "The name on our aircraft is not just a brand," she told them. "It is a promise. A promise of safety, of luxury, and most importantly, of respect. That promise was broken. It will not happen again." She then made an announcement that sent a ripple of shock through the room. "I am promoting Chloe Jenkins to a new role. She will be joining our corporate training division to help develop and lead a new mandatory program for all staff called the Passenger Promise. It will focus on de-escalation unconscious bias and the core principle that every single person who steps onto a Vance Aviation aircraft is to be treated with the highest level of dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, title, or background. Integrity will be the cornerstone of this company, and it will be rewarded." Chloe, standing in the back of the room, was stunned. She was being given a chance not just to have a job, but to make a real difference, to ensure what happened to Serafina would never happen to anyone else. It was a terrifying and exhilarating opportunity, a direct result of her quiet, frightened honesty in that lounge. Hard karma had indeed come for Marcus Thorne, but its opposite grace had found her. 6 months later, the culture at Vance Aviation was palpably different. The Chloe Jenkins incident, as it was ironically whispered among the flight crews, had become a legend, a cautionary tale, and an inspiration. The Passenger Promise program, developed by a team with Chloe at its heart, was now a rigorous scenario-based training module that every employee from the CEO down was required to pass annually. It wasn't a typical dry corporate video. It was an immersive experience that put staff in difficult situations and taught them to lead with empathy and integrity. Chloe had blossomed in her new role. The quiet, timid flight attendant was gone, replaced by a confident and articulate trainer who spoke with the authority of experience. She used the story of Flight VA-77, anonymizing the details, but preserving the core lesson to illustrate how quickly a situation could devolve when authority was misused and bias was left unchecked. She was respected by her peers not just because she had the backing of the CEO, but because her passion for their shared mission was genuine. Serafina Vance had made good on her word. Promotions and bonuses were now tied not just to performance metrics, but to peer-reviewed assessments of character and adherence to the company's core values. The company's reputation, far from being damaged by the public incident, had soared. Clients, particularly women and people of color in the corporate world, flocked to Vance Aviation, knowing it was an airline where they would not have to fight for basic respect. The $3 million lost from Harrington's account had been replaced tenfold by new, more conscientious clients. On a crisp autumn day, Serafina found herself at the Teterboro terminal, once again preparing to board a flight to a tech conference in Geneva. She was dressed in another of her signature, understatedly elegant suits. As she approached the gate, the flight crew, a new captain, a first officer, and 2 flight attendants greeted her. The captain, a sharp woman in her early 40s named Captain Eva Rostova, stepped forward and met Serafina's eye with a look of profound, genuine respect. "Monsieur Vance," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Welcome aboard. It is an honor to fly you today. My name is Captain Rostova. My crew and I have completed our pre-flight checks, and we're ready when you are. Your seat 1A is waiting for you." There was no fawning, no awkwardness. It was simple, professional, and deeply respectful. Serafina smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Captain Rostova. It's a pleasure to be in your care." As she settled into her seat, the same seat where her authority had been challenged 6 months prior, she saw the world outside the window with a renewed sense of purpose. The incident with Marcus Thorne had not been a pleasant experience, but it had been a necessary one. It had forced her to look deeper into the soul of her own company and reinforce its foundations. The new senior flight attendant approached her. "Miss Vance, may I get you a glass of champagne before departure?" "That would be lovely." "Thank you," Serafina replied. She opened her journal. On the fresh, clean page, she wrote a single line. "The standard is not just what you expect, it's what you inspect and what you protect." The hum of the Rolls-Royce engines began its familiar, comforting song. This time, it wasn't just the sound of machinery. It was the sound of a promise kept, a culture rebuilt, and a new standard of excellence taking flight. The plane began to taxi smooth and powerful, lifting off into the vast, clear sky. 8 months after the seismic shake-up on Flight VA-77, a new, more deliberate rhythm had settled over Vance Aviation. The passenger promise was no longer a reactive policy, but the proactive heartbeat of the company. In the gleaming corporate headquarters, Serafina Vance, Robert Maxwell, and a poised, confident Chloe Jenkins were reviewing the quarterly metrics. The numbers were unequivocally positive. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. Corporate client acquisition had increased by 22%, and employee turnover had dropped to its lowest point in a decade. "The data is conclusive," Chloe said, gesturing to a chart on the large monitor in the boardroom. Her voice was steady, imbued with an authority she had earned through relentless hard work. "When employees feel secure in upholding our core values, they provide better service. When passengers feel respected, they become our most vocal advocates. It's a symbiotic relationship." Robert nodded, a rare, broad smile on his face. "She's right, Serafina. What you did was more than just crisis management. You redefined our corporate DNA. The market has responded. We're not just selling luxury. We're selling trust." Serafina felt a profound sense of satisfaction. It was the quiet, deep-seated pride of a creator, seeing her vision manifest not just in polished aluminum and leather, but in the people who gave her company life. She had turned a moment of ugly prejudice into a catalyst for enduring positive change. The storm had passed, leaving behind fertile ground. But the sky is never clear forever. The peaceful review was interrupted by the hushed buzz of Robert's phone. He glanced at the screen, and the smile vanished from his face, replaced by a grim, tight line. "Serafina, you need to see this. It's from our lead counsel." He turned the screen towards her. The headline from a major news syndicate was a digital gut punch. "Disgraced pilot sues Vance. Aviation claims reverse discrimination and wrongful termination." Below it was a professionally shot photo of Marcus Thorne, no longer in his captain's uniform, but in a tailored suit, his face a carefully constructed mask of wronged dignity. The article was a masterpiece of malicious spin. Thorne, represented by a notoriously aggressive law firm known for high-profile media trials, was suing Vance Aviation for $50 million. He claimed he was a victim of a woke corporate witch hunt, a veteran pilot with an impeccable record who was summarily fired without due process by an overly sensitive, power-tripping CEO. The suit alleged that his actions had been a standard operational decision to accommodate a high-value client, and that Serafina Vance had used the incident to make a political statement at his expense. It painted him as the true victim, an experienced white male professional, sacrificed on the altar of cancel culture. "He's not just suing us," Serafina murmured, her eyes scanning the venomous text. "He's trying to put our entire company culture on trial. It's worse than that." Robert said, scrolling down. "He's giving interviews. He's on a right-wing cable news channel tonight. He's positioning himself as a martyr for a bygone era of common sense." The attack was insidious. Legally, Thorne's case was flimsy. They had documented his behavior, his threats, and his history of HR complaints. But this wasn't a battle for the courtroom. It was a war for public opinion. He was attempting to poison the very trust they had worked so hard to build. Over the next 2 weeks, the storm Thorne had summoned grew in intensity. The hashtag boycott Vance, a fringe annoyance at first, began to gain traction. A small but vocal group of their older, more conservative clients began to cancel their memberships, sending letters echoing Thorne's rhetoric about political correctness in the cockpit. The company's stock, which had been on a steady climb, dipped a few points. The echo of Thorne's arrogance, once confined to the cabin of a single Gulfstream, was now reverberating through the entire industry. Serafina remained a bastion of calm amidst the escalating crisis. She refused her PR team's suggestion to engage in a public tit-for-tat. "We will not be dragged into the mud with him," she stated in a tense strategy meeting. "Our response will be in a court of law, based on facts, not on cable news soundbites. We will let the evidence of his conduct speak for itself." However, a deeply unsettling detail emerged during their legal team's discovery process. Thorne's lawsuit contained specific non-public information excerpts from internal training manuals he claimed were ideological indoctrination, and confidential details about the financial incentives tied to the Passenger Promise program. Information he could not possibly have had access to after his termination. "We have a leak," Serafina Robert concluded grimly one evening, his face etched with worry. "Thorne has an ally. Someone on the inside is feeding him ammunition." The realization was colder and more terrifying than Thorne's public lawsuit. The poison wasn't just outside the gates, it was in the house. The cultural rot she thought she had excised had merely been driven underground, festering in the dark. The betrayal felt personal, a violation of the trust she had placed in her people. She authorized a covert internal investigation led by Robert and their head of cybersecurity. It was a painful necessity, a sweep for digital ghosts and whispers in the server logs. They focused on senior staff, particularly veteran pilots, who had been friends with Thorne, those who might resent the new direction of the company, and the rise of a younger, more diverse generation of leaders like Captain Rostova. The trail was subtle, masked by layers of plausible deniability. But it was there. It led them to Captain Alan Croft, a pilot with 30 years of experience, a man who had been on the shortlist for chief pilot of the G700 fleet, a position that had ultimately gone to Eva Rostova 3 months ago. Croft and Thorne had come up through the ranks together, relics of an older, more homogeneous era of aviation. His digital footprint showed encrypted communications with a third-party server, traced back to Thorne's legal team. He was the ghost in their machine. Serafina decided to handle the confrontation herself. She summoned Croft to the same executive lounge where Thorne's career had ended. The symbolism was intentional. Croft entered with a confident, almost defiant swagger, a man who believed his seniority made him untouchable. "Alan, thank you for coming." Serafina began, her voice even. Robert stood by the window, his arms crossed, a silent, imposing witness. "Serafina." "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Croft asked a little too casually. "I'm going to be direct," she said, her eyes boring into him. "We know you have been communicating with Marcus Thorne's legal counsel. We know you have been supplying them with proprietary company documents. This is a direct violation of your contract and an act of profound disloyalty. I want to know why." The blood drained from Croft's face, but his defiant posture hardened. The pretense of civility fell away, revealing the raw resentment beneath. "You want to know why?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Because you've ruined this company. You and your diversity initiatives, your sensitivity training. This used to be a place for the best pilots in the world. Now it's a social experiment. You took a man's career, a good man, a friend of mine, and you destroyed it over a seating arrangement. You promoted Eva Rostova over me, not because she's a better pilot, but because she checks a box. Thorne was right. You're on a power trip, and someone needs to stand up to you." His words were a venomous cocktail of professional jealousy and ideological grievance. He was the voice of the resistance she hadn't known existed, the embodiment of the quiet whispers in the hangars and the resentful glances in the briefing rooms. He confirmed her deepest fear. Thorne wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a disease she had yet to cure. Serafina listened to his entire tirade without flinching. When he was finished, the room was silent, save for the distant whine of a jet engine. "Thank you for your honesty, Captain," she said, her voice dangerously calm. You've clarified a great deal. You believe this company is defined by who it excludes. I believe it is defined by who it includes. You believe seniority is a shield for bad behavior. I believe it is a responsibility to set a higher standard. You see Eva Rostova's promotion as a handout. I see it as the recognition of superior talent and leadership qualities you have just proven you sorely lack. She stood up, walking slowly around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. Your friendship with Marcus Thorne does not give you the right to conspire against the company that has provided you with a living for 3 decades. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Our security team will escort you off the premises. And unlike with Captain Thorne, we will not be waiting for a lawsuit. Our legal team will be filing a civil suit against you for breach of contract and corporate espionage by the end of the day. We will also be turning over all evidence of your collusion to the court in the Thorne case. You haven't just lost your job, Captain Croft. You've become the star witness against your friend. Alan Croft stared at her, his defiant rage collapsing into stunned, sputtering disbelief. He had thought he was a righteous whistleblower. He had just made himself a co-conspirator. As security guards entered the room, his face crumpled, showing not a martyr, but a bitter, foolish man who had just destroyed his own life out of spite. That evening, Serafina stood in her office looking out at the glittering runway lights. The battle was far from over, but its nature had changed. It was no longer about one in man. It was about the soul of her company. Thorne had unwittingly done her a favor. He had forced the poison to the surface. She picked up her phone and dialed her lead counsel. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice resonating with a new, harder-edged resolve. "We have him. We have the leak. His name is Alan Croft, and he's confessed everything. Thorne's case is dead. But I don't just want to defend anymore. I want you to file a countersuit against Thorne for defamation and tortious interference, and I want you to name his news network partners as co-defendants. It's time we showed them what the real cost of lying is." She hung up the phone. The fight was not a burden. It was a clarification. It was a reminder that building an empire was one thing. Defending its principles, that was the work that truly mattered. This story is a powerful reminder that true authority isn't found in a title or a uniform, but in character and integrity. The arrogant pilot believed his position gave him the right to demean someone, only to find himself facing the very person who owned his entire world. It's a raw look at how prejudice can blind us, and how swiftly the tables of justice can turn. The karma here wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration, restoring dignity, rewarding integrity in the young flight attendant, and rebuilding a company's soul from the top down. If this story of karmic justice resonated with you, and you believe that character should always outweigh position, then please support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more content like this. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for listening.